A pessimistic mood reigns in Kiev due to the lack of any prospects for a decisive victory of Ukraine over Russia. The British newspaper The Guardian states, "At the end of last year and the beginning of this year, there was such euphoria. Now we are seeing the other extreme, a decline. And I think we will see some ups and downs for some time." The newspaper quotes Polish ambassador to Ukraine Barton Cichocki as saying, "The picture is not the rosiest. The summer offensive, on which so many hopes had been pinned, has failed when faced with impassable Russian minefields and fortifications. In addition, there are more and more rumors that all is not quiet in Zelensky's team, and that there is a split between him and the commander-in-chief." These rumors received further confirmation on Sunday, when Zelensky fired the head of Ukraine's military medical forces and called for operational changes in the army. After nearly 2 years of fighting, real exhaustion has emerged, The Guardian admits. Optimism and hopes that victory over Russia just around the corner are beginning to fade. People continue to die on the front lines. Disillusionment has reached such a pitch that for the first time since the war began, there have been statements about the need to negotiate a ceasefire, even though it would play into Moscow's hands. The war in the Middle East has diverted attention away from Ukraine and slowed the already limited flow of ammunition. There is growing Ukraine fatigue in the West, and the prospect of a second term for Donald Trump could finally erode U.S. support for Kiev. The upcoming U.S. presidential election threatens to complicate Ukraine's funding plans, which are already fiercely resisted by Republicans, and even the unexpected visit of U.S. Defense Minister Lloyd Austin to Kiev is unlikely to persuade otherwise. Most are convinced that there will be no lasting peace with Russia, and any pause in hostilities will be used by Moscow to rearm. According to opinion polls, the majority of Ukrainians are against negotiations with Russia, especially if it leads to the final loss of lost territories. However, according to the publication, cautious statements are emerging about choosing other tactics amid war fatigue, difficulties in recruiting new recruits, and the failure of the counter-offensive. The choice is very simple. If we are ready to give another 300,000 or 500 lives of Ukrainian soldiers to seize Crimea and liberate Donbass, and if we get the right number of tanks and F-16s from the West, we can do it. The newspaper quoted Volodymyr Omlyan, a former Ukrainian infrastructure minister who now serves as a captain in the Ukrainian armed forces, as saying, "But I don't see another 500,000 people ready to die, and I don't see the West ready to send the type and number of weapons we will need." According to Omlyan, there is another way. This is a ceasefire agreement to make great reforms, become a member of NATO and the EU. Then Russia will collapse, and later we will take back Crimea and Donbass. However, according to The Guardian, this is wishful thinking. Zelensky has already said that any negotiations would play into Moscow's hands, and his advisor Mikhail Podolyak has admitted that the last stage of the war was very difficult and requires the strongest and most difficult concentration. In his recent interview, Podolyak also said that there are no options for real negotiations. All there could be is just an operational pause. Russia would use this to vastly improve its army, mobilize again, and then resume its war with even more tragic consequences for Ukraine. He was quoted as saying, The Guardian refers to Zelensky's recent interview with journalist Simon Schuster, who was preparing his biography and therefore enjoyed unusually close access to his team. According to the publication, it seems that even in Zelensky's inner circle, there are people who doubt Ukraine's victory. Thus, Schuster quoted Zelensky's frustrated assistant, who said that he literally raves about winning on the battlefield. "We have no choice. We're not going to win," but try to tell him that. Additional difficulties for Kiev rose after the Hamas attack on Israel and the retaliatory military operation in Gaza. First, for the first time since February 2022, Ukraine found itself out of the spotlight of world leaders. Secondly, and Zelensky himself admitted this led to a reduction in the supply of weapons to Ukraine, which aggravated the already difficult situation of the AFU. And thirdly and finally, when Zelensky compared Russia to Hamas, calling them the same evil, he undermined Ukraine's desire to expand alliances in the Middle East and other regions outside the West, and that was a key part of new Defense Minister Rustem Umerov's mandate. The same Podolyak acknowledged the onset of a cooling in Ukraine's relations with many non-Western countries. This has made it more difficult to build a broader coalition of support for Ukraine in the fight against Russia. Ukraine is also daunted by the prospect of Donald Trump returning to the White House. He has repeatedly claimed he could bring the Ukrainian conflict to a quick conclusion, and while officials say Ukraine's support will remain regardless of who wins the presidential election, concerns have been voiced privately about what Trump's rise to power would mean. According to The Guardian, it came up in every meeting. The newspaper quoted former U.S. Ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul, who is now working with Zelensky's administration on sanctions, as saying, "But even setting aside the prospect of Trump returning for another term, Ukraine is being hampered by Republicans. They could derail the Biden administration's plans and prevent Congress from passing a new Ukraine aid bill." Some Republicans have been opposing the bill since as early as September, meaning that supplies to Kiev have already been cut. Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, even traveled to Washington in hopes of convincing Republicans of the importance of continuing arms shipments. As The Guardian notes, Ukrainians rallied around Zelensky at the start of the war. They practically felt in awe of his leadership. Over time, however, their attitude began to change. The newspaper writes, citing an informed source, that Zelensky is worried about the Churchill phenomenon, namely the electoral defeat of a wartime leader. The presidential election was to be held in March 2024. However, there has been speculation that Zelensky may try to move the vote to get a new mandate before the more difficult phase of the war. This has caused quite a reaction from civil society and statements that it is impossible to hold elections in the current situation for security reasons and lack of necessary logistics. Most developed democracies agree that elections cannot be held during war. Everyone should have one priority: to defend the state. The publication quoted Olga Avazovska, chairwoman of the Ukrainian public organization Opera, and an election specialist, as saying, as a result, Zelensky said that it was impossible to hold the election next spring. Opposition politicians say that after the end of the war, questions about Zelensky's actions in the run-up to the conflict will be reconsidered. In addition, the newspaper notes, various compromat is being spread in Telegram channels, from where most Ukrainians get information and read news. However, says The Guardian, Zelensky's ratings are still high, as are those of Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhny, in whom many see a presidential contender, although he has not declared political ambitions. In his high-profile interview with The Economist, Zaluzhny called the situation on the front stalemate, for which he received a portion of criticism from Zelensky. However, Podolyak dismissed suggestions of a conflict between the two. Zelensky is his immediate superior. There can be no conflict by definition. Nevertheless, former Polish Ambassador Cichocki is sure that there has been a surge of political cheating in Ukraine in recent months. According to him, the consolidation of a unified force is gone, and the usual politics has returned to Ukraine.